China is panicking over tariffs, moving heaven and earth and hundreds of billions of dollars to hide its worst economic crisis since COVID. Is China on the edge of collapse, or will they come to the table? After Trump imposed 145% tariffs on most Chinese goods, last week Beijing commanded its 867,000 state-owned enterprises, which make up a third of China's economy and most of its stock market, to buy their own shares to desperately prop up Chinese stock markets. It told private brokerages to monitor customers for, quote, excessive selling, presumably tied to your social credit score, since China is a police state. Meanwhile, commanded Chinese banks to buy yuan and dump dollars to prevent the Chinese currency from collapsing. The People's Bank of China, their Federal Reserve, jumped in, selling billions of U.S. treasuries not to crash our bond market, but to save the yuan. Beijing then cranked up the printing presses, promising the biggest fiscal deficit since 2010, the 2008 crisis aftermath, including dumping $178 billion of so-called special treasury bonds aimed at infrastructure, so bridges to nowhere to soak up unemployed workers, along with direct payments to companies hit by tariffs. Now, I mentioned in recent videos how last tariff war in 2018, China paid for the tariffs so its companies could maintain market share, which made the 2018 tariffs on China pretty much a free lunch. Note, all of this is on top of a $1.4 trillion stimulus package that China rolled out just after Trump's election. So the background here is China was not doing so hot before Trump's tariffs. Trillions in cheap money drove overproduction. At one point, China had 400 electric vehicle makers, of which 300 have already failed. About 100 to go. Copy and paste across hundreds of industries, and China has to dump cheap goods overseas. Overcapacity put China into deflation, but China's export prices crashed by 20% in some goods. This was already causing tensions with Europe, who opened anti-dumping probes on China before Trump showed up. Toss in the collapse in Chinese property markets, also bloated by cheap money, and a crash in foreign investment. It was negative $168 billion in 2024, and more than half of the Chinese economy was already in recession before Trump. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. There's an entire industry of pundits predicting that China's on the verge of collapse, that it is a giant house of cards. In the long run, I don't think that's true. In many ways, China is much stronger than the U.S., certainly in manufacturing, which we stupidly gave away. The Chinese education system and small business environment offer valuable lessons for our useless politicians and bureaucrats. Having said it, the moment, China is a lot more vulnerable than it looks. China's companies are swimming in debt. Their banks are over-leveraged, gambling big with a small pot, and exports to the U.S. make up a big enough share of China's economy to crash both. If that happens, Beijing may be forced to liquidate its overseas holdings, which are overwhelmingly parked in dollar assets, in order to fund the mother of bailouts. In a recent video, I mentioned how the dollar is falling and U.S. stocks are falling, partly because foreigners are liquidating. If China jumps in with both feet, we could see even bigger drops in the dollar and stock markets, extending to the bond markets that prop up our entire financial system. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.